when people talk about, well, what's product? I was like, well, ultimately it's about people and problems and possibilities.
There's a misunderstanding or sometimes a misinterpretation of what product is.
It's about having an element of humility and healthy skepticism that you might not be right, and being able to try and then subsequently optimize the experience for people.
All of a sudden shift into a world where everyone buys everything through their digital devices.
Yeah.
It's like turning the Titanic, right?
Yeah. People talk a lot about mobile first,
Yeah.
but it's not mobile only.
Yeah. For people who are passionate about the idea of building great digital products for the next generation, what kind of inspiration or thoughts might you have for them?
Dive in.
Welcome to another episode of Waracle Talks. Today I'm very excited to have with me Jim Bathgate, who recently joined our product practice to help Waracle continue to build innovative digital products which are trusted and used by millions of people. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jim. How are you?
I'm very well. How's yourself?
Oh, I'm very, very well. Usually how we start out this conversation is by asking, can you give us a bit of background on your experience, both in the space of digital and technology, but also give us a little bit of a perspective on what gets you up in the morning?
Sure. So I've been working in the digital product space, if you want to call it that, for about 15 years now. Started off, I guess, really kind of optimizing how and modernizing how we deliver, right? So I started off with Sky, the media company. And at that time, the first thing I worked on was this big behemoth workforce management transformation.
Okay.
And it was the literal definition of Big Bang. And so I learned a lot from that early on. And then since then, I've kind of weaved my way through the world of kind of product and analysis and delivery, with a keen interest in fixing problems more than anything else.
Yeah.
And I think when people talk about, well, what's product? I was like, well, ultimately it's about people and problems and possibilities, right? And all of those things are exciting. So yeah, I've been in that kind of space for a good few years now, and then moving into like lots of different industries. So background in finance, as well as media. And I think the good thing about working in both of those areas is you get a lot of different opportunities in terms of things that are presented to you, everything from mobile app work to regulatory work. So you get a real good broad spectrum. It's a good grounding for someone who's interested in kind of working in that space. Yeah. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, moved into the world of consultancy, and I guess that kind of industry spectrum has grown as a result of that.
Yeah.
Everything from the medical space, again, more finance or wealth management. So yeah, it's been a real interesting ride, and I think the main thing that gets me out of bed every morning is just, and it sounds really cheesy, right, but it's the opportunity to make things a bit better.
Yeah.
Like, the world's full of rubbish stuff, and if we can make it slightly better, one app or one experience at a time, then what's not to like about that?
Yeah, it's interesting that I suppose that motivator of like having an impact, I suppose it's one thing that can almost sound trite how many times it's mentioned in the digital space, but I suppose that every time that you engage with a product in terms of a methodology of serving someone or a methodology of doing business, whatever it might be in terms of like organizational middleware or an app out to a consumer, ultimately that started with an understanding of like a user's problem.
Yeah.
And like what is not to love about trying to solve a challenge that someone is experiencing.
Yeah, exactly that, right? I think it's really multifaceted, because you picked on a good one there, right? It's sometimes people go, oh, well, it's back-end integration. That's not product. It's like, well, it is, because it's going to impact the experience that someone has, right?
Yeah.
And I think, products, like, it's really multifaceted for me, and I think it touches on a lot of different areas. And yeah, there's the front-end element of it, but I'm probably, as much as interested in like customer experience as I am product as well. I think you have to think in that holistic manner, because you've got everything from when you sit down in the pub and your mate goes, oh, have you seen this thing? It's really good. And I didn't even have to sign in, to, like once you've actually interacted with it. And again, it's easy to fall into cliches when you're talking about product. You're talking about getting to that aha moment and like delighting customers, but ultimately that's what it's about. Like, I can think, I've got so many apps or whatever things that I've had on my phone that I just don't use because the UX is terrible, whatever. I'm one of those people that moans at the self-service checkouts in the supermarket. It says card only. Why are you asking me? So yeah, I think there's if you can make those things, alleviate those challenges and problems for people, then it's a great place to work, right?
Do you think that there's a misunderstanding or sometimes a misinterpretation of what product is within different organizations? I know that sometimes there's maybe a view that it sits more in the sort of business analysis space. In other places, it's more about thinking about what next and refining over time to a better version of a future experience or problem or product. In your experience, do people misunderstand what product is as your role?
I think the quick answer is probably.
Yeah.
But it's probably not their fault, right? So I think in the same vein as business analysis is a very wide or broad church, right?
Yeah.
You've got everything from you're going to be writing business cases to get funding for something to write me a Swagger spec for an API integration. So it's a big circumference to cover. And I think product's probably similar.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people talk about product thinking, and then you start thinking about mindsets, and then you sound like a Jedi, right? And it's like all these challenges. So I think, yes, ultimately, if I had to try and encapsulate it in a phrase, it's about having, or for me anyway, it's about having an element of humility and healthy skepticism that you might not be right, and then trying to prove that you were.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, once you've done that, and being able to try and then subsequently optimize the experience for people, or whether it's targeted at a particular customer behavior or indeed a business goal.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's interesting the point you make about how things morph and change and I suppose are reinterpreted over time. You mentioned at the top about having worked in sort of one guise of your current role or current discipline for the last 15 years. What do you think are some of the biggest sort of like most seismic changes that you've kind of worked through and seen change in the organizations that you've worked for?
Sure. I'll leave the obvious one till last. Well, I think sadly I'm old enough to remember we're all agile now phase. And I think that was the first one where larger organizations especially really kind of struggled to adapt or embrace, or whatever adjective you want to use, to, again, because it is ultimately a way of thinking about how you approach work.
Yeah.
And I think as a result of that, things like the Agile manifesto, etc., or the agile thinking's taken a bit of a beating recently. It seems to be like an easy target for people. Agile is dead, all the rest of it. And I think that's probably because of where people have tried to apply it, rather than the methodology itself, or the thinking in itself being wrong. So if you take it to something like a financial institution that's very heavily regulated, it can be challenging to go, we're just going to do a 5-day design sprint and then it's all going to be fine, right? So I think there's been that element of it. And I think products, certainly in the last kind of I'd say 7 or 8 years, product thinking has definitely become more popular. I would say you're seeing a lot more of it on social media.
Yeah.
You're seeing a lot more of it on LinkedIn. People are talking about it more. I mean, I don't know how many blogs there are out there, how many podcasts there are out there. Some of them are really, really good, and I think it's good that people are talking about it, because it gives people almost permission to ask questions, and people permission to go, well, nobody knows everything. And, I'm sure Marty Kagan and Lenny and Teresa Torres and all the rest of them quite happily put their hand up and go, we don't know everything all the time. So I think it's definitely a bit of an evolving craft, if you want to call it that. And that's a good thing, right? Because it proves that there's still longevity and still interest in it. So I think that's been moving forward quite a bit recently. Excuse me. I think certainly what we've seen more as well of is cross-functional collaboration. So again, when I first started, it was, big requirements, BRD, 17 pages of Excel long, and then you would pass that to a developer and they'd swear at you under their breath. And then we'd move on. So there's definitely more collaboration, and I think there's real, I'm a big believer in getting people involved early, because first of all, I don't know what they know. Yeah. They'll bring something new and a different angle to the questioning, and I think that's really good for when you're starting to shape stuff up. Yeah. And I think the more people that understand the premise and why we're doing it, the better, because it helps when you're, if you're potentially bringing more people in at a later stage, you've got more people who can evangelize around the why. Yeah. I think that's really, really important. So that seems to be going in the right direction. And then I think probably just with the advent of cloud computing and the availability and the cheapness of ultimately hardware and indeed software is like a lot more data informed now.
Yeah.
And I think that's to the benefit of product. Like I've always said, I think product works best by consensus. And what I mean by that is that everyone understands what it's trying to achieve and can feed into it.
Yeah.
So, it's quite challenging sometimes when you go into organizations, if you're in a consultancy model and you go, okay, well, what data do you have on how things perform? At the moment, they don't have any. And, that's not their fault. It's just where they are in their experience. Yeah. So, I've seen a big change in that, and like organizations getting a little bit more data savvy, and then obviously the advent of AI has been an absolute like rocket through the industry, I would say.
So just before we get to AI, I'd like to just like sort of double click on a couple of moments that you spoke about previously. So do you think that like in the definition of particular ways of working, does it create potential problems in that people get wedded to the dogma of a particular period in time's version of how great digital product development was done? And is it like a process of having to like reestablish what the sort of modern version of your previous working practices were, and being able to move forward through that in the understanding that there's no perfect way to build digital products?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? I think as humans, we crave certainty, and the clever people amongst us know that doesn't really exist, right? But equally, that's quite hard. You're not going to get funding if you go, we're not quite sure what it is, right? We're just going to figure out as we go. Yeah. So there needs to be that balance. I do think there's definitely, I guess, some pillars on which, or I guess like things that will point you in the right direction for good practice. I'll never say best practice because, there's not really, in my opinion, best practice for anything. But good practice in terms of, like start with the problem, understand what issues or problems that your customers are facing. How does that align to your business? Because and maybe this is a quick answer, but I've always kind of said there's three main questions you need to try and answer. What are your business goals and objectives? What are the customer behaviors that feed into those? And then lastly, how do you encourage them to do more of that?
Yeah.
And maybe a fourth one and how do you measure that and prove it to be true? Right? So I think you can, within those kind of four headers, there's a bunch of things you can apply. And I'm still learning. I think everyone who's honest in the product space is still learning.
Yeah.
And I come across new tools, and I think that's what's great about working in consultancy and working with lots of different organizations, is you get introduced to people with slightly different ways of thinking or slightly different approaches.
Yeah.
And so you are constantly learning. So I think good practitioners are always open to learning and to be not so much proven wrong, but have their world thinking challenged.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think certainly maybe 10 years ago, there was this striving for certainty. And I think, not to go too deep dive into it, but that's when you start to have conversations about the subtle differences between delivery plans and roadmaps and how there's a bit of creative tension between those, So yeah, I think people are warming up to the notion that having that kind of skepticism or carrying that doubt until a moment that you can prove it is a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
And I guess it's where it bumps up against the financial modelling of that that can be the challenge.
Well, I think it's really interesting the point you made about if you're an organization and you know what your goals and objectives are, whether that's North Star, or whether that's more sort of strategic initiatives, and if you have enough information about your consumers and if you have enough information about your business, you can start to understand how you map those things together. Lots of instances, businesses don't have a North Star. They don't really know what their strategic initiatives are. And sometimes they don't even have that much data to go on. And so in those worlds, you realize that because digital wasn't necessarily part of the fabric of the organization, it got stuck in a silo over there somewhere. And that creates operational intricacies, right?
Yeah.
I remember when I worked at a bank that considered itself a neobank, our chief customer officer said to me, "We're not a neobank, we're a legacy telephony bank." And his point was we were stood up as a joint venture
Mm.
when everyone got credit cards, loans, and insurance over the telephone.
Mm-hmm.
So we stood up an organization based on the primary customer communication modality was the telephone. So what did that require? It required, contact centers and CSAs, and it required phones, and and then to all of a sudden shift into a world where everyone buys everything through their digital devices, and everyone engages with their financial life on digital devices. It's like turning the Titanic, right?
Yeah.
It's not an easy job.
Well, I think as well, companies will have made significant investment in technology, like you say, and then all of a sudden it's never what's the phrase? It's never kind of obsolete overnight.
Mm-hmm.
There's still, maybe again, I don't want to deep dive too much, but there's also that thinking that your customer is a single person, right? There's a breadth of customers that you serve.
For sure.
If my mum's anything to go by, there's a cohort out there who still want to pick up a phone, speak to a human, and she'll do that regardless of how easy it is to use an app.
Yeah.
So I think that notion of telephony's dead, there's probably an element of truth in terms of the sheer volume that's coming through. Yeah. But also you have to consider what the value is of that, and what the what the culture is of your organization as well. Like, do you want to be seen to be able to help all your customers in whatever channel suits them? So people talk a lot about mobile first, but it's not mobile only.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the term that was used quite regularly was we want to encourage the digital primacy.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that wherever you go first is a digital platform. And I think even at that time, the digital primacy was somewhere around about 30% or something like that. So 30% of customers reached out to digital initially. It's a fascinating one. I interrupted you just before you were about to speak about AI's impact on product.
Oh, no, it's fine.
It's a tiny topic, so you won't speak for very long. But I suppose that the interesting thing, we've had a few conversations over the last little while about how sort of adjacent tooling has started to impact the discipline itself, the opportunity for creative thinking time, the opportunity to address potentially bigger or deeper challenges. What's your feeling on how AI has influenced your practice as a product person?
Well, I think it's a very thorough domain, and again, I would say I'm an enthusiast rather than an expert. But yeah, I think there's obvious benefits to being able to, I guess, expedite process more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that old cliche about you never fully know the requirements until people start using it, right? Or you can get people using things quicker, much quicker.
Yeah.
So I still think there's a place for people coming together and challenging ideas and innovating through imagination, and getting to that point where we think we've got something solid that we want to go and validate.
Yep.
But then you can get that much quicker. So what used to be like a fake front door test where you'd create a wee CTA and then someone would click in and go, "Oh, terribly sorry, this and that," you can actually build something they can interact with really quickly. So I think that's really beneficial. There's some very clever people out there doing some real clever things around taking a small cohort of research that you've done with actual users and then extrapolating that up into like a larger data set based on what they've told you, and like that synthetic data use and synthetic user personas, etc. And I think that's a real exciting space.
Yeah.
In the sense that research is one of the things you always used to get a bit of pushback for. And again, maybe that's that kind of old mindset of, why do we need to speak to humans? Well, because they're the ones who are going to make your product success. So, and I get it, right? The challenge around that is the cost of it, and both in terms of time and also in terms of the money that you need to go through to get there. So being able to make that a much more straightforward and giving you an indication, right, because that's all it'll ever be. I remember this and I can't remember who it was, but maybe an apocryphal story of I think it was Sony or some other large stereo maker. Other stereo makers are available. And they were doing a bit of research around like boom boxes. Yeah. And so they done a little focus group with people, and everyone was like, this is mid-80s, like, yeah, I want the black and red one that's like totally mean, and yeah, I can walk down the street with that. And thanks very much, that's been great. Please help yourself to one as you leave. for participating, and every single person took a white one.
Yeah.
So, it's that classic thing, what people do and what they say are different things. And I think if you can get indications through quicker, ultimately, you can then go away and validate those with real people if you want.
And do you think that those synthetic personas might sort of infer biases in the way that humans do? I remember digital product teams bringing in users to review certain features and functionality changes on a web platform that we were working on at the time. And the one thing I questioned was if you could trust the opinions of people that you've bought lunch, fed them with cakes and biscuits, and then at the end of it say, do you like our digital product? Because like you've already primed the audience to a certain degree to like, or at least say they like it regardless, because they're going to feel very vulnerable in that case of responding negatively to their experience with a particular.
That's an incredibly interesting question, and one that I don't honestly think I've thought about before. The fallibility of humans is, well charted, I think is fair to say. And it'll be interesting to see how that subsequently starts to pan out. I guess, as with everything, if there's human input, there's the opportunity for bias to exist. Right? And I think that's one of the key things why, good practitioners around AI will always say have that kind of human check, just to make sure that, nothing's going awry. But good question, and I'm not sure I have an honest answer.
Interesting. If we sort of go down the rabbit hole of kind of like establishing a set of criteria or potentially biases in terms of the way that you work, I think sometimes when you are working in a consultancy and you're working for large clients, you can get an established sort of modality of working with those clients. You've come from a background in a history of working in large organizations client side and then come into the world of digital product consultancies. What do you think you learn and have learned that infers how to work with those large organizations because you've been a part of those large organizations? Do you think it's like it allows you the opportunity to really empathize at a greater level with the kind of stuff that people are going through within those large organizations?
Yeah, I think so. I think potentially unfairly, consultancy, there's a little bit more weight put to their opinion. And that's a good thing in my opinion, because it helps shift the dial if people have been, like kind of channeled in their thinking. I think it's an interesting one. So one of the challenges you face in consultancy is getting up to speed with domain knowledge. And I think, just touching back on AI, I think that's one that's a really beneficial use case for AIs, is being able to build a relatively good handle on domain knowledge quickly, because that's kind of table stakes, especially if you're going into the financial world, right? People expect you to understand about consumer duty, they expect you to understand about PSD2, they expect you to know about what regulations are coming down the line around vulnerable customers, etc. And that should be informing your thinking, your decision making as you go. So I think definitely like having that, knowing what people expect you to understand from a large organization. I guess finance is the one that's kind of jumping to mind, because it's the one that perhaps in the medical space as well, there's considerations around that. So I think, being able to understand or almost the kind of lingua franca that people use, right, within those organizations is really, really helpful. And then I think understanding I guess it's a bit of organizational wisdom, for lack of a better phrase. So, you can't just go, we should be doing this and here's the reasons why, and expect to get traction on that, right? So I think you need to understand, the stakeholders and where they sit within the organizational structure, what things they're concerned about, what things will help convince them, who they then have to subsequently go and convince. And that's where, one of the perhaps underrated skills of storytelling and persuading comes into play. And so I think that's really useful to try and think about that dynamic when you're going into an organization. And then I think just that bit around there's that classic piece of how do you earn trust quickly, right? And often that's through proving that you can deliver something well, and do it in a way that's, impactful. for lack of a better phrase. And I think keeping that in mind when you're coming in as a consultancy is always really useful as well. So yeah, you might want to do all these super cool things and, let's build out a synthetic user base. Well, how about we go in and we prove our worth first?
Yeah.
And I think understanding what people consider valuable to them and to their organization is a good way to tackle that challenge. So I do think definitely having worked in larger kind of enterprise level organizations, you get a good feel for, like I say, the kind of organizational wisdom and what levers you can pull and what things are either going to kind of alleviate your challenges to speaking with stakeholders or potentially throw up some barriers.
Totally. And I think you mentioned about sort of cross-disciplinary teams, and I think that like cross-organizational teams can be quite a challenging area. And I think to your point, you as a consultancy who's partnering with a client, you kind of don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And especially when you first kick off, the worst possible way to kick off is to make a bunch of assumptions about what drives their business, but what makes that vertical tick, about how these organizations function. And a lot of the time it's about having the humility to pin back your listening ears, right?
Exactly. 1 month, 2 years, you fall into cliches really quickly, but I think it's really, really important. And I think, again, if you think about finance, right? Compliance, regulation. It's there for a reason. It's to keep people safe, and it's to keep the organization safe, right? And you can rail against that, or you can treat that as the boundaries within which you have to work.
Yeah.
And I think if you involve those people early and make them realize that we're not considering you as an afterthought, we value your opinion, we value your input.
Yeah.
Again, it's just how you build those relationships with people. And I think having worked in larger organizations, you've got a little bit of a kind of sixth sense about where some of the sticking points might come.
Yeah.
And so that allows you to consider about reaching out to those people early, bringing them into the fold, having some conversations about how this is potentially going to impact them.
Yeah.
Because what you do within consultancy rarely happens in isolation, right? So there's always downstream impact for marketing or compliance or whoever it may be.
Of course.
And most people don't like surprises, unless it's your birthday. Most people don't like surprises, and they've got their own roadmap, and they've got their own timescales, and they've got their own resource constraints. So somebody coming along and making a problem for them's not really a good start. So I think, just trying to reach out to people, build those relationships, and having worked in some of those larger organizations, I think that's helpful.
Yeah. Do you think, product being a sort of discipline that's based on curiosity, communication, the ability to analyze and understand information, be that quant or qual, like how do you think the discipline of products will change in the coming 5 years, say, as maybe the toolkit changes, maybe the some of the kind of anchoring kind of practices and approaches to work change? Can you foresee a seismic change on the horizon for product teams?
Probably. I mean, if the last couple of years is anything to go by, then potentially. I mean, I think the key tenets of the craft still hold true. It's like understand your problems, understand your users, take that healthy skepticism with you, and until you've kind of got to a point where you've built enough confidence to think about it. And then, it's difficult as well in terms of how things land in the market have changed significantly as well. 5 years ago, no one cared about TikTok.
Yeah.
Now there's people who've built entire careers out of TikTok. I mean, Instagram's a similar model. I'm sadly old enough to remember when Instagram was somewhere people just stored their photos. There was no wall, there was no messaging, there was nothing else. So I think as technology evolves, you should expect that, your craft will have to evolve with it. You've got probably a second generation of digital natives coming through now who have different expectations and have different assumptions around how the world works.
Yeah.
So I think you need to be open to that. It'll be really interesting as you've got this kind of generation starts to come into the working environment, and then as the original digital native generation starts to move into positions of influence, like whether that be middle management or exec or board or whatever. It'll be interesting to see how that changes and what attitudes change with that, and then subsequently how practitioners and craftspeople need to change with that as well. I mean, I guess design's probably an area that's a really good example of that. That's probably had a quite rough ride of it in terms of people underappreciating the craft. Then there was like a key peak point where like, what designs, again, you speak to a designer about this, but it's not one thing, it's experience design, it's user interface design, there's multiple elements of it. And then maybe now people are lessening their, and this is my opinion, is maybe getting a bit of short shrift in that, oh, well, we can just get AI to do that, right? And I think if you craft will have to prove its value and worth more on the human side than the technical side, I think.
Interesting. Last question. If you were to offer up some advice to a young person that was potentially coming out of school or maybe just coming out of university that was interested in developing a career in product, what sort of advice might you have for that person? I suppose it's interesting because product is a discipline I always think is like jam-packed full of people from a myriad of different backgrounds, so there's probably not a clear single route into it. But for people who are passionate about the idea of building great digital products for the next generation, what kind of inspiration or thoughts might you have for them?
Good question. I guess first of all, be curious. I don't think there's a static state of perfection in terms of being a product practitioner. I think it's always an evolving journey towards your craft. So stay curious, stay humble, I guess, in the first instance. Study people as much as you study digital products or indeed processes.
I love it.
Because I think that's one of the key things that people often forget, is in most cases, if not all cases, you're interacting with people first and foremost. So get curious about people. Read, consume, listen to whatever it may be as much as you can. There's a million, like I say, there's a million blogs or podcasts out there that are really, really useful. There's some really great books that are out there. Don't be scared to try things and fail, because I think that's ultimately what product's all about.
Yep.
Right. You're not going to know for certain if something's going to land. I mean, the man who invented what's it called?
I was going to say Sinclair C5.
So was I, but we're aging ourselves terribly. No, terribly. The Segway, that's the Segway thing. The man who invented that will be testament to that, right? That was going to revolutionise transport, I'm sure they said. So yes, and then just jump in, get your hands dirty, build stuff. Try and get involved in everything you can. Like you say, most people come to product from various different backgrounds, right? And I think that curiosity is usually the thing that brings them to there. So yeah, get your hands dirty, try stuff, mess about on Miro, learn your tools, just dive in.
Yeah, I love it. Dive in's a great place to finish. Thanks so much for making time today. It's a really great conversation.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.